Hey folks, and welcome to the League Start guide for my Exsanguinate Reap Miner for 326. This is the build I decided to League Start after an extraordinarily successful League Start in Frisia as a Surfcaster, and I've also played this as a Trickster in Settlers, which is why I know this is going to be good. Exsanguinate is primarily known as a mapper, and it's an exceptional mapper. This guy's going to help you scale damage high enough that you can do bossing with it too. And that's my plan. My plan is to opening weekend boss with this build. I'm planning on doing a bunch of opening weekend carry service, and ideally I'll be running day 3 Ubers if things go to plan. Now one of the reasons I like this build is there are nooks and crannies where if you understand the underlying mechanics, you can squeeze out a lot of extra damage. And I'm going to show you in this video some breakpoints to get large damage increases in game that you wouldn't be able to find in PoB, and I'm going to show you these empirically. I'm not just going to wave my hands. I've got detailed notes that you can use as a reference, and since I'm planning on League Starting this, you'll be able to follow me, and I'll be providing updates as we go. Now in my opinion, the most important thing to touch on first is how does a build feel to play. Exsanguinate as a skill is an S tier mapper. The way it works is Exsanguinate is a 0 duration projectile, which means that it instantly hits a target. Now normally you'd have to pay a casting cost, but mines allow us to pay the casting cost after the skill happens. This means as soon as the mine is detonated, it hits something, and then in one server tick it chains, and then it chains again, resulting in screen-wide clear. Not only that, this is a cold conversion build, which means everything is frozen all the time. Those things combined make for a very, very comfortable mapping experience. You can ask around, anybody who's played Tuna's Exsanguinate Miner will tell you that. Now Exsanguinate is a physical spell and it's paired with mines, which means we have access to a lot of scaling. And Exsanguinate by itself can be scaled into bossing and uber bossing, but it's much easier to do a gem swap into Reap, which can give us more than double the damage. Reap is a similar skill in that you pay life and it does a bunch of physical damage, both a dot and a hit. This happens in a scythe in front of you, which means AoE matters, and it doesn't happen instantly, but you get something called blood charges. And for each blood charge that you have, you get 20% more damage. And the skill comes with 5 of these charges. Now mines allow us to work around the downside on the skill. So when you kill something with a blood charge on it, you lose it. But because the mine is actually doing the killing, if we can acquire a blood charges some other way, we have permanent uptime. And add on to that the Swift Killer Ascendency node, which gives us triple charge duration, and we have uptime of 30 seconds each time we acquire blood charges. And in fact, Vaal Reap gives us 9 blood charges for 8 seconds. For an eye-watering 180% more damage. The dot portion of Exsanguinate and Reap were buffed this patch, however I'm not scaling the dot at all, so it's not really a big deal. But there is a new +2 chains glove prefix, which I may or may not use. It's going to sort of depend. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And the damage here just scales absurdly high. And you can use very cheap uniques to get all the way through 4 void stones. Let's talk about some cons, because no build is without those. I'm using a gem swap for bossing, and my expectation is that I'm only going to do this gem swap for pinnacle bosses and uber bosses. I'm planning on using Exsanguinate for basically everything, but if you want to use a gem swap for map boss, that's fine. I just don't like gem swapping if I can avoid it. The next downside is a low relative EHP. Instant screen-wide freeze is an extraordinarily strong defensive layer, and actual survivability is quite high. But if you're looking to tank an uber hit, this is probably not going to be the build for you. Now, that said, you can build a Trickster to be extraordinarily tanky, and if you want to do that, you can do that with this build, but that's not the direction I'm personally taking it. I'm using Minefield in this build because it gives a comical amount of additional damage. Now, the way that mines work is when you throw a mine, if there's an additional mine being thrown, you pay a small cost per mine being thrown. Now there's a math formula behind it, but the thing to know is that when you push Minefield, it's going to take like 350 milliseconds or so for you to get all the mines out. Now you don't have to use Minefield. You could use something like Swift Assembly and take the damage hit, or go Curtain Call and stack Int and Dex if you like. But Minefield is basically free and a massive damage upgrade, so I'll be using it. The last downside is, maybe it's a downside for some people, but it's worth mentioning that I don't start with Exsanguinate. For some people, they want to play the skill as soon as they can, all the way into the end game. I don't do an Exsanguinate Reap transition until I'm into level 80 or so. I'm going to be playing Power Siphon Miner through campaign and early maps, and even with the nerfs, I'm expecting it to be an exceptional campaign runner. And the tree actually looks a lot like what the Exsanguinate Reap mine configuration will be, so the respec cost is minimal. But it's still a transition, and it's something that you'll need to manage at some point. Now, what type of content is this build good at? And the answer here is most things. If you like Legion, this is going to be one of the best Legion farming builds. Expedition, Breach, of course, Ritual, Betrayal, Harbinger would be great at. Delirium at modest tiers. I think if you really juice Delirium, you want something probably high invest, but that's probably true for any Delirium farmer. The things that it wouldn't be very good at are Delve, Simulacrum until you get to very high investment, because you really want to freeze everything and Late levels of Simulacrum is notoriously difficult to do that, and probably meat sack T16 farming until you get a lot of investment. I'm sort of expecting that since meat sacks have made a return, that's going to be the new meta, is just loading up a meat sack with a ton of mods. Now by proxy, this means that super juice T17s are also going to require a similar level investment of the character, but I farmed a ton of T17s in Settlers and I know this build is capable of it. Let's talk about the mechanics here. Exsanguinate is a zero projectile skill, like I mentioned earlier, with built-in chains. Mines allow us to trigger the skill and pay the casting cost after, so we get instant projectiles and instant chains. Now this skill costs life, and because of that, it means you reserve life, and because of that, you're going to need some life regen. Now we can solve this early with the Kikazaru, which is a super common ring, and then later by flat life regen on our gear or with a vitality. But importantly, it means you can spend your entire mana pool on reservations for auras. Now Reap is a similar skill. It also costs life. It shoots out a scythe sweeping in front of you. It does have a duration. Now if you hit a mob and it doesn't die, using Reap you gain a blood charge. Now if you kill a mob with Reap, you lose a blood charge. And a blood charge is worth 20% more damage per charge. And it also increases life cost by 20%. Now mines gain these blood charges just like you would expect with a mine skill attached to something. But if we can gain blood charges some other way and let the mines do the killing, we will never lose our blood charges. They only expire. Now enter Swift Killer and we get 200% more charge duration and a full 30 seconds of 200% damage when we have blood charges. Now to get the charges outside of the mine, what you need is something to trigger it. And I'm using Arcanist Brand, or if you wanted, you could use a trigger weapon. But attach a level 1 to an Arcanist Brand and let that hit a few times. It's not going to kill anything, but it will give you the blood charges. Now Vaal Reap works slightly differently. You get instantly max charges, and you get a buff called Boiling Blood, which allows you +4 maximum. So now we're at 180% more damage, but the buff only lasts 8 seconds, which is still a ton of time, and also means that you're going to need additional life regen during that period, or at least enough to cover it. Okay, for Ascendency, I'm playing it as a Trickster. Now, I love Trickster. I've played many Tricksters, and the reason is simple. It gives a ton of damage. It has a massive defensive shell that you can lean into. And in this case, the interaction between blood charges and Swift Killer is huge for damage uptime. Trickster also has massive flexibility. If you want to go pure DPS glass cannon, you can do that. If you want to lean heavily into defenses, you can still do that. Now, Saboteur has a lot of AoE, which is nice, especially for Reap. And I'll talk a little bit about AoE later. And Born in the Shadows is actually a really strong defensive node. It just doesn't quite meet the peaks of Trickster in my opinion. Now the playstyle is important. Exsanguinate is a range skill, and like you'd expect, you just run around and hit the button once, 5 mines drop, and everything freezes or dies. It's an evasion energy shield shell with Ghost Dance, which is durable in maps, but you don't want to just stand in packs, play it like a range character. I use shield charge up until late game when I'll swap to dual wielding wands or scepters, so having some attack speed makes for a really smooth and fast mover. Now bossing is the more interesting setup. Now the only gem you actually have to swap is Reap for Exsanguinate. I don't personally use Chain or Awaken Chain in Exsanguinate because honestly I'd rather have the damage support like Trap and Mine, both for progression and power, but if you're using Chain and you aren't using the new Mercenary Chain affix on your gloves, you're going to want to trade that out too. Now the way it works is like this. You're going to throw a bear trap or two at the boss's feet before it phases in. Then wait until about a second before the boss is about to phase in and drop an Arcanist Brand at their feet. Now there's some breakpoints here that I'm going to talk about in a later section. Feel free to skip there if you want, but don't throw the brand too early is the TLDR. Now you're going to spam Reap, and if Vaal Reap comes up, hit it. Generally speaking, that's about it. Not much was going to survive this. You also have the option for conditional damage, like Focus DD, which I personally love, or maybe self-casting a curse if you want to have a balance of terror. But those are extra buttons and not 100% necessary unless you're really trying to max out your damage. Alright, let's take a look at this leveling PoB. So there are some loadouts, but more importantly, there are a ton of skill tree progression steps that you can take a look at. Starting from the top, I'm going to be going Rolling Magma until level 31 when I can pick up Charge Traps and transition to Power Siphon Miner. Now, Power Siphon Miner was nerfed significantly in this patch. However, it was so comically strong that it will still be a very good campaign runner. And the mine tree is pretty similar. There'll just be a transition when you get to probably early red maps to move into Exsanguinate and Reap. Now I've documented each of these steps. You can take a look at the tree and transition through it. There are something like 10 different tree progression steps. And if you have any questions, I've written down all of the progression notes that I have in the notes. There is a ton of information in here. You should definitely start here if you're stuck on something or are unsure about what to do next. As you're leveling, make sure you get frequent or semi-frequent weapon upgrades. You want ones with high base crit, you want flat lightning damage, you want flat damage of any other kind. Spell damage is great. If you can source the unique Duidra's Tenure, that is a lot of extra damage. My strategy is usually peek at the vendors, and if I come across a Wrath Essence, I'll use that. But otherwise, I just rush a campaign. Now, the transition is going to be important that you make sure that you have correct pieces of gear before you start the transition. You probably also want a reasonably high level of Exsanguinate. If you're transitioning from a pure crit power siphon setup down to something to a spell gem that is lower level, it's just going to feel bad. And this is one area where if you're not speed rushing the campaign, this will help you. Usually you can pick up a much higher level Exsanguinate or Reap off of trade from all the players who are rushing campaign and have been leveling it in their offhands. I'd probably try to get at least a level 18 Exsanguinate and ideally even higher than that. Important affixes on your gear are going to be +1 gem levels, +1 physical gem levels. Spell damage is great. And really importantly is spell crit. You'll notice in the items that I've benched spell crit in a couple places. If you have a few essences, you can get some spell crit that way too. But crit is going to be the name of the game in order for the Exsanguinate Reap transition to feel good. The next important thing, and I cannot stress this enough, is make sure you have 100% or close to 100% conversion of physical damage to cold. Now you can get this with a dirt cheap unique called a Hrimsaro, or you can do it through a combination of the Cold Mastery and Betrayal Gloves and a Glove Implicit. But all of your cold damage and by proxy all of your freezing ability is coming from that. It's also important that you have enough life regen, and this is going to come from a Kikuzaru early. These are super common, very cheap, but you need to have a lot of life regen or this unique. Now speaking of that, let's take a quick look at the gear. I'm using an imbued wand. Now wand isn't important here. You could use a rune dagger or a scepter. I would prioritize getting good stats over a specific base type since I plan on using shield charge until much later in the game when I go dual wield. All of the pieces are going to be hybrid evasion ES. Both of those are defensive layers and tricksters excel at it. The necrotic armor or a sadist garb if you like is really easy to make with Recombinator. You basically just pick up all the bases that you find when you're mapping, put them on your filter. And then you can alt for T1 or T2 of hybrid and flat, and then just bench the third mod and maybe exalt a suffix. Now that's an ideal base, and obviously a 6-link isn't something you're going to have on the first day. So what I typically do is I will look for good corruptions like a +2 gems, and I'll use Tainted Orbs of Fusing. Some good uniques to do this on are a Restless Ward. You could do it on a Kintsugi, which was massively buffed this patch, or any of the random rares that sort of poop out of Ultimatum. This is a really basic chest, even though the numbers are very high. The rest of the gear is basically life, res, and stats we want on jewels are just like you would for any other spellcaster crit build, crit multi, life, and so on. The gearing, especially when you're just getting into late red maps, is super simple. Looking at her skills, I'm using shield charge to get around, detonate mines linked with automation. I'm also using steel skin, although it's not ticked here, but a guard skill is really nice to have. Later in the game, if you have it enhanced, you can put that on here and that will fix one of your mind throwing breakpoints, which I'll talk about in a minute. Grace, Summon, Skitterbots, and Hatred are the three obvious auras here. Grace and Hatred in particular, get as high as you can. If you get a 21, that's great. In this 6-link setup, I'm using Exsanguinate, Charged Mines, Minefield, High Impact Mine, Trap and Mine damage, and increased critical damage. Now, when you first do the transition, you might want to use increased critical strike support instead of increased critical damage. The more important thing is to have a high crit chance because that's what dictates how often you freeze. And you can also opt to do chain or maybe awaken chain later, but my personal preference is trap and mine unless I were maybe spamming Legion. Now, one important consideration when you're setting up your skills is should you use Lifetap or not? Now, one of the nice things about Reap and Exsanguinate is that they cost and reserve life, so the mana you can completely push to auras. Now, you have to have enough headroom to actually cast the skills you want, like your movement skill, your curse, so keep that in mind. Lifetap is an option, or you need to have enough reserve that you can actually cast all your skills. Now, one really important thing, and this is the first breakpoint I'm going to talk about, is faster casting on Arcanist Brand and Reap. If we tick and untick it, it gives us 0 damage. However, there is an important numeric breakpoint that you must hit if you want to have 5 blood charges up when you're bossing. By default, with no modifiers to duration, Arcanist Brand exists for 5 seconds and can be attached for 3 seconds. Now, turning it on and off, you'll see that it dramatically affects the trigger rate. And by proxy, this is a big boost to your damage. You want 5 blood charges, and the only way to get it without having to recast Arcanist Brand is to improve your cast speed. Now, you can get it on gear, you do something else, but I found that just linking faster casting was the easiest and most reliable way to do this. Without it, you're looking at a 20% damage loss. I'll demonstrate that here. Both of these kills were identical, except with one I had faster casting on and one I had faster casting off. Now for the second really important breakpoint that is not obvious, I did a video a little while back about important mine breakpoints, and I'll link that video in the description below. But the important thing you need to know for this build is that getting 2% CDR somewhere can improve the number of instant mine detonations you get from 4.3 up to 5. Now this only takes effect once you've fully qualityed and leveled your automation and detonate mines gem. So it's not urgent, but the moment you do it, it's going to feel really good. Now you don't have to worry too much about overthrow with this build, but watch the mine breakpoints video and keep an eye on the number of mines you have active. Things like expert sabotage are huge for damage, but if you stack a ton of them and you have a lot of mine throwing speed, they can affect your overthrow. One last thing, I am going to start streaming at some point soon, probably next week. I'll leave a link down in the description, but I've never done it before. So if you're interested in asking me questions or checking out how I'm doing, feel free to stop on by. All right, and that is pretty much it for the League Start version of this. I'm gonna post another video soon about ramping this into hundreds of millions of damage. I've done that also. But for now, I know we're a little more than 2 days away, and I know people want to practice. So I'm going to drop the video and the PoB, and feel free to ask me any questions you might have in the comments. I'll catch you in the next video.